You're watching the PoliticIt Podcast.
Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt Podcast. I'm Senator John Johnson. We've got Tiara Auxier with us and new representative.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
So your district, you cover part of Morgan County, part of Summit County, part of Rich County, right?
All of Rich County, yeah.
All of Rich County.
And all of Morgan except for one little slice. So
You know, it's interesting. I was part of that. Of course, Kira Birkeland was in that seat before. She stepped down right before the session. We had a special election. And to me, I thought that was a fabulous event. This is the delegates getting together. It actually shows how important a caucus convention system is, I think, because this was an example where the delegates got together. You know, you've done stuff with the schools and other, but out of the people running,
I was unknown.
Yeah, you were an unknown, really.
I mean, it really does show that the value of FaceTime with delegates being able to see that who is running for their party actually represents the principles of their party, and being able to talk and get answers rather than just see names on a ballot.
It was fabulous. I mean, over 90% of the delegates showed up. Well, 94%, I think, is what it was.
It was a huge
which means maybe a couple of people didn't come.
Yeah, 4, I think.
4.
Yeah.
Which to me was totally amazing. I mean, I went to that event. You know, I kind of stayed out of the politics of it, but there were certainly people I knew that I actually thought were going to win.
Yeah.
And I didn't know much about you, but, you know, there's an example where I think the delegates made a good choice.
Thank you so much.
Right?
Well, I wouldn't have had a chance otherwise. This just shows that you don't need a lot of political backing, a lot of money. You just need ideas, and you need to be able to speak to the delegates to be able to have a chance to run. So
what about you? What about your story was important to them, do you think?
They liked that I was like them. I kept saying, you know, I'm just a normal person. I've been a mom who cares about what's happening in our schools. That's a lot of what I was doing, was in school community councils over the years. I saw some of the issues that were happening in the county with state overreach. I'm a tax accountant by education, and I had a lot of opinions on how our property taxes are and other taxes in general. And I think it just resonated a lot. And, you know, I wasn't ever looking to be a politician. And I think maybe that resonated too, that I just hadn't been, you know, someone who just wanted this position.
So let's talk a little bit about you and your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? People need to get to know you a little bit better and your background.
Yeah. So I grew up in Draper.
So you got your generals out of the way. When did you decide that accounting was your thing?
Well, that was actually it. I wanted to study international business.
Okay.
And as one of the generals that you have to take is accounting. And I took that class and I was like, oh my gosh, I actually really like accounting. And that was it.
Which really says something weird about you.
It is very weird about me.
You know, I was trained as an economist, and I used to tell people an economist is a person that likes to work with numbers but lacks the personality to be an accountant. which you know, accountants aren't known as the most personable, right? For some reason, there's just that thing out there,
you know,
right?
The crunchy numbers and very analytical, but you know, along with that, I actually really enjoyed a lot of my general credits and getting that exposure to the liberal arts that maybe, you know, my left brain doesn't normally think of or think like that. And
right.
So, like, I love history. If I could do anything, it probably, now looking back, I love history. I love to read historical fiction, nonfiction, everything. And so
that's fascinating.
Just one aspect of it, but I thought accounting would be good, especially I was planning on being a stay-at-home mom. But, you know, if I wanted to go back to work, I could always work tax season, help with the family.
Have you done that before? Have you worked?
I have, yeah. So I worked for a great boss, and then after I had kids, I actually tried to bring my baby to work with me when I had my first baby, and that was a disaster.
And you just decided that you were going to take a break.
Yeah,
right?
but every couple of years he'd call me up and be under a crunch, and need help. So I'd go back and help tax season.
So you moved to the U, and that was basically to study accounting, right?
Yeah, it was.
You wanted to be at a bigger university and have broader course
Yeah, I
selections.
needed to finish my last 2 years, and the university was a great school. I got into the School of Business up there, and I really, really loved accounting.
So you studied accounting. Now, was your goal to be a CPA, or what did you?
I always knew at some point I would go back and get the certification. But I got married and knew that we were going to be having kids, and I didn't want to keep up on the continuing education. And so I figured I would just cross that bridge when my kids were old enough, and decided to go back and get the CPA.
Oh.
So, and actually now we passed legislation this past session that makes it so you don't even have to have a master's in accounting anymore. It's based off of hours and experience. So that was a really interesting bill that came up. I had no idea.
Yeah, when I was teaching data analytics at Utah State, I had a lot of the accounting students taking classes that I offered in information systems, which is a good field for accountants too. And so, they were getting their hours at their graduate hours, and in fact, we had a couple of them that got master's degrees in information systems, but yet sat for the CPA exam.
That's really interesting.
So, what was your interest in politics, and how did you get involved with that?
Well, it started very, very young, actually. I was born on George Washington's birthday, which has always been very special to me.
That's cool.
And I think it also kind of spurred my interest in history. I remember just reading all these National Geographics when I was young about like the Revolutionary War and all sorts of things. And so, learning about the Founding Fathers and the choices they made and the different forms of government they looked at has always been really interesting. And so from a young age, I've always been really involved. My mom too, she's involved in politics. She's always, been a delegate or involved volunteering with different organizations. And so I kind of saw that as being mirrored for me. And then in college, actually, it was during the election of 2006, I believe. And I was the president of the College Republicans.
Oh, very cool.
When I was at SLIC, and I got involved with kind of just the statewide College Republicans at the U as well. And so that was really fun. And I've always followed it, mostly more national. But then as I became a mom, I really started realizing things at the local level and wanting to get involved with, the school community councils, like I said, but I never actually wanted to be a politician myself. And so this just kind of is very surprising to me that I ended up here.
When I actually looked up information about you when you were running, I actually found a number of articles that you'd written while you were in college. What took you to there?
Yeah, I'm just not afraid to try things. And so one day I decided I wanted to start writing for the newspapers, so the Utah Chronicle. And I realized that
So that's the campus paper.
That's the campus paper. And I wanted to be a political opinion columnist. And I started writing.
People ought to go out and read some of those things you wrote. I actually found them quite interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. And you can imagine being a conservative on a liberal campus, kind of how that was received.
So the U is a liberal campus?
Are you surprised? It was actually really interesting because I actually got more views and interaction on my posts than they'd ever had. And I think just, there was a lot of clickbait with my titles. I didn't ever get to choose the titles of my articles, and it would drive me crazy sometimes, some of the stuff they would choose. I'm like, just read what it says first
before you pick something out. Yeah.
But it was really a fun thing. And so you can tell that I've always cared about politics. That's what I wrote about.
Right.
And it was just something I wanted to do.
That was fun for you.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to take a break and then we'll come right back.
Okay.
Tired of media bias? Frustrated by political noise? PoliticIt.com cuts through the clutter, giving you real facts, clear analysis, and unbiased insight on the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay empowered. Whether it's elections, policy changes, or breaking news, we've got you covered. No spin, no agendas, just truth you can trust. Visit PoliticIt.com today, because informed citizens shape the future. PoliticIt.com, where politics meets clarity.
Welcome back to PoliticIt. We're talking to Tiara Auxier, and we started talking about this phase you went through at the university and writing articles, which actually, a conservative on a liberal school paper was kind of interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it just shows that I'm not afraid to have a voice that may not be as popular in some places, and I'm not afraid to stand up. And I think, that's helping me well now here as well. And
yeah.
As a representative.
So you've got a tie. It's interesting. We talked during the break, and I found out about your ties to Mount Liberty, which is interesting because it's a small liberal arts college, a traditional liberal arts college, and fairly small, started by some really interesting people. And I think they've done a very good job with their students. But why don't you tell me about your tie into that and why that interested you too?
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of twofold. I had a teacher when I was at Salt Lake Community College, and he was my political science teacher, and he very involved in politics. And when he found out that I was interested in the 2004 election, he got me a job working for Huntsman's governor campaign. And that was my first time going out, knocking doors, kind of, going to conventions and seeing what that was like. And it was really fun. But that was kind of the end of it. And then later in life, after my kids were growing up, I started learning more about, the great books and liberal arts, and feeling like, maybe I wanted a little bit more of that. Education, and I wanted that for my kids. So I started looking around, seeing if there was anything in Utah, and up pops this Mount Liberty College, and it's this liberal arts college in Utah. And lo and behold, it was started by my political science teacher, and I just thought that was amazing. So I took down one of my high school daughters they have a summer camp every year where they read a book and then they have discussions, and it was a really, really cool thing. And I got to meet a lot of the students and just see the type of education that they're having, and I love that. So I want to support that in Utah. So with your bill that you ran this year, wanting to support, those great books.
Right. Moving back to traditional liberal arts education. Yeah. What an idea, right? To actually just go back to the past.
It's crazy. But, the governor said it was one of those most important bills run this session. And I thought, I agree with that. I think it would change so much if we could get that strong foundation of Western civilization and the inheritance that we've gotten, and why we are the way we are today, because it really explains everything if we know that base.
Right. You brought up George Washington, and it's interesting. I just wrote a story about Jefferson's University. It's actually a chapter out of a book that I'm working on, and what's when Jefferson founded the University of Virginia, it's interesting that it was kind of the first public university, right? The other universities that were around, which were the Ivy League schools, right? Yeah. You talk about King's College, which is Columbia now, Harvard, Yale. It's interesting. They were religious schools, and Jefferson built this campus without a church on it, and kind of a revolutionary thing. But the reason why I kind of went to there though is because Jefferson felt like civic education was really important. It was important to educate the populace, and for people to understand where the ideas came from for this experiment we were conducting, right? And where his inspiration came from. But one of the required readings in civic education, the most important reading, according to Jefferson, was George Washington's final address.
Really?
Yeah, and so it's interesting to me, this tradition. So what did you get out of that, going back to some of that? some of the great books. What inspired you?
Well, it was actually really fun. I don't know if you know, but Harvard a long time ago, like, I don't know, late 1800s, early 1900, put out something called the Delphian Society. And it was all the great books and kind of like a college course for mothers or women who weren't going to school, but they could get that same education if they went through all of this. And I happened to find it one day and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do this. Like I was saying, I felt like maybe I didn't have as many liberal arts experiences as I would have wanted. And my love for history. And so I started, back in Greece. And I started reading the Iliad. I started reading the Odyssey. And then we went to, the Roman one, the Latin one, which, gosh, I can't remember what it is right now. But just seeing the values that start out, looking for heroes, looking for the good in things, looking for
the good and the beautiful, right?
Yes,
I mean, it's fascinating, and people say, well, these are old dead white men, right? And why are we focused on that? Well, the whole idea of just having conversations, right? Having discussions, going back to the Socratic method, which was really let's sit down and talk about these things, right?
And having a purpose for those questions. I feel like in our society today that we're asking questions without necessarily having a goal in mind. But if you have the goal that you're looking for the good for civilization, you're looking for the good for human attainment and virtue, that you get led in different ways than when everything's up in the air and there's no moral right or wrong. And I think that is what is so important.
Well, and that right or wrong came from the humanities, which means mankind talking to mankind, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's not religion. Religion is man's conversations with God, right? This is man's conversation with men, and humankind, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting the conversations that took place, and a lot of that rooted in virtue, right? And the public virtue, and that was important to Jefferson.
It was. And then also to see, kind of with Jefferson, is that all of these, the Aeneid, that was the book I was thinking of. But these are all pagan people writing these books. And so it wasn't really a Christian thing. But then when Europe fell, it was the Christian church that held Roman law together for the civilization of Europe. And that was really the foundation of all of these Christian monarchs in Europe that, are just following this path. And, it's so interesting to see what has come because of that.
Right. Yeah. And I think people mistakenly think that, this return to the great books is we're going to turn universities into catechisms and learn religious topics, and it really isn't. It's taking that. In fact, that was Jefferson's idea, not having a chapel, because he felt like these great lessons could be taught in a secular fashion, right? That's what the humanities were about. You didn't need the dogma. And that was his complaint, right? We don't need the dogma from religion, but we need these principles.
It's true, yeah.
And what's happened is there's been this vacuum created because the secularists completely drove God away.
It's true. I mean, even if you think about the Bible is one of those great books, and you can read it as literature. It does not have to be only a religious text. And that's what I think, some people think, and the left is like, no, you can't have that even in there. But if you look at some of especially the Old Testament, you see themes in there that you see in all these other books. And, it is more about virtue and goodness than it is trying to convert. And I think we can have conversations about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's important. It's all, there's this potential of having this renaissance, right? Of what is good and beautiful. Before we end, though, I wanted to go back to your accounting background, because you passed a bill this session that I felt was one of the most important things that we did. Talk a little bit about your tax bill.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually really, really proud of that book. I got told many times that they never let freshmen do property tax bills, but I was glad that it was able to be passed. But one of the things that happens is when you're in your appropriations committees, they kind of go through line items of the budget, about 20%, 25%, right? And as you do that, they say, okay, here's all this funding, here's how it's being used. And I saw this one thing and I'm like, wait a second, what is this? How is this being calculated? And so we found out that every time the legislature raises tax rates in a certain place, it actually raised this other account over here. And it was not going through truth in taxation. It was not going through voter approval. It was just happening automatically. And over 7 years, it had accumulated to $200 million with an ongoing accumulation and compounding of $30 million every single year. And, you know, if we want to fund our schools, I'm not opposed to that, but I think we need to be doing it in a deliberate manner. And so, I ran legislation to get rid of this little loophole of just this
the indexing
shadow
on property
tax that no one seemed to know about. And so I'm thrilled that it passed.
So there's a portion of your property tax that's an education tax, right? But there's a portion of it that has an automatic increment to it.
Yeah, without any notice. Every single other tax we have, especially property tax, that you have to get. You at least need to go through truth in taxation and let the voters know that you're raising their taxes. And this was just flying under the radar because it did not have those same requirements.
And so now that index has been taken off of there.
That's right.
So, you know, hey, that was one of the things you said you were going to do, right?
It's true.
Was work on property tax issues, and there was a tax cut. You know, it's not that you're going back and reclaiming the past. You're just saying from now on, this isn't automatic.
Yeah, we're stopping this compounding. And if you can see what compounding does, if you ever see a chart, it goes like this with no end in sight. And so to be able to cut that off and stop that, I think is going to be really powerful over the years.
So what are some other things that you worked on in you know, as we wind down?
Yeah.
Talk about some of the other things that
With my interest in education, I ran a couple education bills, and I live in a rural area. And so it was a rural schools athletic funding bill, which means that in facilities in rural areas, if you go to their schools, many times you'll notice that they are not on par with their urban counterparts. And so this set up a grant program for schools in these rural areas to be able to either repair or upgrade their athletic facilities for their kids. So I'm really excited about that.
And you ran it. We ran a bill together.
Together too,
right? And
it will give preference to schools who maybe are not having the funds to be able to do AP classes or offer some of these other things, or maybe not have a teacher for that. That they will be able to have preference with online funds to make sure that they have access to those. That was pretty bipartisan effort, right? I mean. And something else that was really big for rural schools this year was a reworking of the entire formula for rural schools. That was Karen Peterson's bill that I was very happy to put my name to and help co-sponsor that, because that will make a huge difference to these rural schools.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I committed with Senator Hinkins, is that, you know, I found out that the formulas really don't favor the small schools in rural areas, and we really need to work on that. And that bill was an important step forward.
Bill. If you look at the way that people are taxed in rural areas, they are paying a way higher percentage of what they're being taxed at in order to get the state matching funds. And so I'm really hoping that this will address a lot of it and maybe continue to look.
Yeah, they you know, there's a certain overhead for administrative costs, and it's a lot harder for rural schools because they don't have the student numbers to bring that fixed cost down, right?
That's true.
And so these efforts that you made there and some of the other things that we've done, I think, are really important.
Yeah.
Any concluding thoughts?
I would just say that we're continuing to look at property taxes. I had put forth a bill this session that I wanted to be looked at for interim. And it's basically the idea of right now with property taxes, if you have new growth, that is calculated outside of what the budget for taxes is, but then they get all of that taxed at the same rate that they already just calculated their budget to be. So it's extra money. And then the next year, that is your level line for your budget. And I just feel like there's got to be some economies of scale for these new growth areas that maybe we don't need to keep the tax rate where it is the entire time. Maybe we can bring that down a little bit. So I would love to look at how property taxes are actually being calculated, and if we need to keep bumping them up every year, or if we can actually start, coming down a bit.
Very good.
Thanks.
So appreciate you coming in. We're out of time. Tiara Auxier, and
Senator.
Great for people to get to know you better. And
Thank you.
We'll see you guys next week.